I guess we're ready to start. Good evening. My name is Thack Dyson, and I'm the rector of St. Paul's Church in Daphne, and welcome to tonight's program. And before we begin, I'd like for Bishop Russell to offer an invocation.
Thanks, Thack. Thank y'all for being here. When we planned the 50th anniversary about a year ago, we didn't know what 2020 would bring, and 2020 has brought a lot. But I'm certainly glad that it's brought us here together tonight for this particular topic. I'm glad that it has brought Dr. Catherine Meeks to be with us in our diocese, and that all of you are here. I'll be honest, this prayer is one that I've woven together a few of my own thoughts with a portion of a poem and two prayers from one of my heroes named Howard Thurman. So let us pray. In your presence, O God, we make our sacrament of thanksgiving for the life given to us, for the time given to us, for friends who love us enough to tell us the truth, for the heroes, saints, and martyrs who have carried your sense of the future into today, for the power of language to meet us, to awaken us, to disturb us, and to heal us. Lord Jesus, we can't do this without you. We need you. We need your spirit of compassion that heals the heavy laden. We need your impatience with oppression. We need your courage to look at our own heart, no matter how hard it may be to do so. We need your strength to speak in love. We need your strength to listen in love. Maybe most of all, we need your sense of the future. Let us not be frozen either by the past or the present. Keep alive in us the future look, the high hope of peace. To that end, make us more than we are on our own. Teach us how to order our days, that with sure touch we may say the right word at the right time and in the right way, lest we betray your spirit of peace. Let us not be deceived by our own insecurity and weakness, which would make us hurt another as we try desperately to help ourselves. Keep watch with us, O Father, over the days of our lives, that with abiding enthusiasm we may be in such possession of ourselves that each day we may offer to you the full, unhampered use of our lives as your instruments of peace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Russell. Let me introduce myself in terms of what we're here about. I'm a member of the Diocesan Central Gulf Coast Jubilee Committee. About a year and a half ago, Bishop Russell convened a gathering of folks to help plan the coming of our golden anniversary for the diocese. And we incorporated three themes, and they were remember, reorient, and renew. And the Jubilee Committee's calendar of events was designed to offer opportunities not only for recollections of the past, but to offer ourselves, to recommit ourselves to Christian discipleship and to invigorate the faith of the diocese. And with Bishop Russell's leadership, the committee adopted a calendar of activities that broke the year into thirds, each emphasizing a word from the theme. The first part of the year, for example, was dedicated to remembering, which included everything from the history of the diocese, individual churches in the diocese, and also our various agencies of the diocese, including Wilmer Hall, Beckwith Camp and Conference Center, and Murray House. And as the year progressed, parishes were asked to focus on creation care, liturgy and worship, racial justice and reconciliation, discipleship, evangelism, generosity, among other topics. And the year was supposed to end with a celebratory weekend in December featuring our presiding bishop, the Most Reverend Michael Curry, who was offered to preach and have fellowship with us. And the weekend was also supposed to offer a lecture by the well-known death penalty lawyer, Brian Stevenson, director of the Peace and Justice Initiative, and the founder of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery. And the jury is still out whether or not that will happen in December. We're going to meet as a committee next Monday night to further explore that. But again, we're looking at the COVID pandemic and trying to work around all that. Speaking of the pandemic, it's caused us to push the pause button on many of our activities in recent months and quite possibly what happens in December. But fortunately, it's not prevented us from gathering for the next 3 Wednesday evenings with Dr. Catherine Meeks. And this brings me why we're gathered here tonight via Zoom. The Jubilees Committee theme for the month of August is racial justice and reconciliation. And in the words of Bishop Michael Curry, we made a commitment to live into being the Jesus movement by committing to evangelism and the work of reconciliation. beginning with racial reconciliation across the borders and boundaries that divide the human family of God. To help us to achieve that purpose, we enlisted the expertise of Dr. Catherine Meeks, the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta, to help us dive deeper into our Learn, Pray, Act commitment by exploring systemic, institutional, and personal racism and learn what we can do to dismantle it. And I'll let Dr. Meeks introduce tonight's topic of truth momentarily. And we're going to incorporate in these conversations the 4 quadrants of the Becoming Beloved Committee curriculum used by the Episcopal Church. And those 4 quadrants are telling the truth, proclaiming the dream, practicing the way, and repairing the breach. And we will walk together with the hope of recognizing all manner of racism and work for its eradication. Well, the Jubilee Committee has other resources for the month of August, and I commend to you our Jubilee Toolkit, which every congregation should have. And it has some great study materials. And also I want to make a plug for this Saturday. We're having the Jonathan Myrick Daniels Pilgrimage via Zoom. And the guest speaker is going to be Dean Kelly Brown Douglas. She's an African-American Episcopal priest, womanist theologian, and the inaugural dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary. She's also the canon theologian at the Washington National Cathedral. And as part of the commemoration this Saturday, Bishop Russell will introduce the roll call of the martyrs, the prayers of the people, and offer a brief reflection. And the pilgrimage will be this Saturday online, August 15th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Again, thank you for being here tonight. Now we'll turn this over to Sonia Crawford, who will introduce Dr. Catherine Meeks.
Thanks, Zach. Again, I'm Sonia Crawford. I'm one of the members of our Commission on Racial Justice and Reconciliation. And before I introduce our speaker, just one bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions tonight as you're listening, you can type those in the chat box, and then we'll have a time later in the evening that we'll get to those. And your chat box should be located in one of the corners of your screen, depending on what kind of device you're using. I was really pleased to be asked to introduce Dr. Catherine Meeks tonight because I doubt she knows it, but she's had a significant effect on my journey into racial healing work. I first met her about 3 years ago when I read her book that she edited, Living into God's Dream, Dismantling Racism in America. That book, along with her newest one that she co-authored called about Ida B. Wells, A Prophet for Our Times. Those are 2 of the most marked up and underlined books on my bookshelves. She came to Pensacola when our commission was forming, and she helped us to discern who God was calling us to be. She helped guide us by sharing her wisdom and insight and advice from her lifetime of work. And she continues to be a valuable and generous mentor and source of encouragement for us. Presently, as Zach said, she serves as the director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. And the core of her work has been with people who have been marginalized because of economic status, race, gender, or physical ability as they pursue liberation, justice, and access to resources that can help lead them to health, wellness, and a more abundant life. Dr. Meeks is the retired Clara Carter Cree Distinguished Professor of Sociocultural Studies from Wesleyan College in Macon, and she has a master's degree in social work from Clark University and a PhD from Emory. She characterizes herself as a midwife to the soul of her students and workshop participants. And in her many years of pursuing the truth, she has had great teachers, and she names them as her sons, the Bible, Jungian psychology, cross-cultural stories, and other books of wisdom. But she also says her greatest teacher has been rheumatoid arthritis because it's forced her to listen to her body and pay attention to messages from her heart. I think this is what I most appreciate about her is emphasis on our inner journey and that as a guide to our outward action. She's frequently asked to present commentaries on Georgia Public Radio and other radio and TV programs. She's the author of 6 books and 1 inspirational CD, and she also has a podcast called A Brave Space with Dr. Meeks. And her latest book, co-authored with Reverend Neb Stroop, is Passionate for Justice, Ida B. Wells as a Prophet for Our Times. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Meeks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sonia. And I do remember coming to Pensacola, it feels like decades ago now, because time passes so rapidly, and that you all were just getting started with this work. And it's been really wonderful to watch the progress over these past 3 years. I am delighted to be here and thank all of you for taking time out this evening to come and be engaged in this topic. I want to talk tonight some about our Native sisters and brothers as we continue to encourage ourselves to tell the truth. One of the pieces of truth that we need to start addressing a lot more intentionally is the history around our Native sisters and brothers. We have talked so much about oppression of African Americans, which we certainly needed to talk about, but we cannot afford to be kind of playing a game of Olympics with oppression. We have to really try to include everybody and not create spaces where there can be some bits of competition. So I want to frame the conversation about Native people in this way. If you could think about that there was a group of people living in this land that European explorers thought they were discovering, and that those people who lived here had very sophisticated ways of farming and tending to the land and being community that would have been a rich contribution to civilization had they been given the opportunity to continue. But the way in which the explorers came and approached the people that they found was with the attitude of discovery, and that there was nobody here that was, that they were discovering land that was uninhabited is kind of the way in which they acted. And they instigated something that came to be known as settler colonialism. And that settler colonialism ended up with them being able to devastate the land and to really take over the land and really creating the space that we find ourselves living in today. So settler colonialism, it was a way of conducting business that was deeply rooted in genocide. And I want to tell you what the United Nations Convention in 1948 said about genocide. Genocide is an activity that involves these things: killing members of a group of people, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a particular group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And if a group of folks engage in any of these things, their behavior was considered genocidal. So one of the things that you need to understand when we are trying to talk about what has been our way of dealing with those that we have named as other, in this part of the world, and actually Europeans were the ones who instigated these policies and ground them into the fabric of the New World, was the notion that you could just get rid of people if they were in your way. And this use of genocide as a methodology for doing that is something that we have to make our peace with. And it's something we don't want to talk about. It's something that we don't want to admit. It's something that we have spent most of our historical reporting ignoring and denying. And it really is an issue that we have to come to terms with. When you think about that, you who are on this call with me tonight sit in lands in Florida and Alabama, and Native people were there. Native people were in Georgia. Native people were all over the Southeast and in other parts of this land as well. And we don't see them. They've been moved away or killed off or placed in what we call reservations, which is a kind of strange thing to think about. If you could imagine, if you could just try for a minute to imagine what it would be like if somebody came into your house tonight and moved you out onto the lawn in a tent and made you live in the tent while they occupy your home. I think that's kind of how that must have felt to the Native people, because they were here and they had homes and lives and rich culture. And I want to encourage all of you who are participating in this event tonight to read the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States by Roxanne Ortiz. It's actually called An Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. It will be an eye-opening experience, and it will help you to have an understanding of history from the point of view of those folks who were the victims and who were not the people that, you know, when the victor tells the story different from when you hear the story from the person who lost. And it is important to try to hear both sides of the story and to try to understand what is the truth in between those two kinds of telling. It is no doubt in that we have to engage when we start thinking about what happened to Native people. We know they were here. We know they were here with their ways of doing things, that they were, they tended the land, they had communities, they were peace-loving in many ways, and they're always characterized as being violent and ready to kill people. That is not the case. They were pushed to defending themselves because of this genocidal policy that was enacted against them as time went along. So I think to think about settler colonialism that was grounded in a policy of genocide. And then we went from practicing genocide against the folks that we found here to bringing people from the continent of Africa later on to help with the land, with work in the land and to build the economy and to build the country. And those people, we talk about those people as being a part of the African diaspora, the people spread abroad from the continent. We cannot afford to try to build a present or a future on false information. And the information is painful, and the information needs to be taken in as a path to liberation, rather than somebody having to think that, you know, somebody's just trying to beat me up and beat me over the head and make me feel guilty. I want to be really clear tonight to say, talking about these issues of Native people and people of African descent and African people, and even in later years with Latinx people and Asian people who've come to our land and who have encountered being othered in many ways that are unfortunate. It's not about trying to find ways to make white people feel bad or trying to find a way to create guilt or anything like that. It is about saying that We understand that we have been called by God to be free people, and to be people who open up the spaces among us so that God can be present, so that beloved community can happen. And we understand that if we don't tell the truth, there is no way for that to happen, because that kind of liberation cannot come from people not telling the truth. I mean, lies do not liberate. That is a fact, that lies do not liberate. The truth liberates. And so we who are people of faith have to kind of stand and look ourselves in the faces and say, what about that liberation issue? Is that something we really want to engage? And how are we going to go about being the people that hold up the possibility for beloved community to be real? And we do that by telling the truth. So it's not a surprise that the first section in the quadrant for racial reconciliation is telling the truth, because we know that. I mean, even when you were a little kid, if you did something wrong and you told a lie about it, you just know how bad you felt until you told the truth. And even if you got into trouble for telling the truth, you still felt better, because now you just had to get over getting into trouble, but you didn't have the burden of this big secret that was hanging over your head. So when it comes to Native people, we are glad to call them first Americans, or first this or first that. And so in the literature, it talks about firsting them. You know, they're first at all these things, but with no kind of real respect and regard for them and their culture did we attach to that their being first, or else they would still be walking among us as equal sisters and brothers and citizens in this land that they actually inhabited when the so-called explorers got here, and all of the rest of us who are here now. And if we don't talk about them as being first, we like to talk about them last. You know, put up statues for the last one that was the last tribe, or the last group of folks that did this or that were Native. All of these were people who were made in the image of God and who were loved by God. These were beloved children of God that we practiced genocide against. We practiced genocide against a whole bunch of nations of people, and our church was complicit in some of that activity as history unfolded. One of the things that the Episcopal Church did was host and have schools, those Indian schools that we took little kids from their parents and tried to make them, civilize them, I guess is what we would have called ourselves doing, by cutting their hair and making them speak English and doing all the things that we thought you needed to do in order to be civilized. We took little Black babies from their mothers and sold them into being laborers because it was necessary for our economy. And we talked about many times in circles that where it was talked about that slavery was yes, it was indeed evil, but it was necessary. Some writers were willing to say. So kind of standing up to that truth and looking it in the face and saying, you know what, this is the history. This is the part of what we did to create the place that we now occupy. This is the way we went about carving out this land that we are so proud of. And it was not right. And it was not what God would have had us do. That is not the behavior that God would have been glad to see us enacting. I think that you can say that with a sense of being willing to see the truth for what it is, if you can separate yourself enough from thinking that it was about one single person. You know, this situation that I've just been describing was systemic. It was set up by our leaders. It was put into place in terms of policies. So when we look at the truth in this way, it is important to understand that it's not just about any one individual, and it's certainly not about me or you. It is about a whole collective, a way of thinking and being. And to the degree that we can understand that truth and understand the parts of it that need to be interrogated and need to be reformed, needs to be healed, we can then move on down the road. But if we insist on sitting down and acting as if it's really just all about us, and if somebody's talking about race and racism, and you're a white person, that they're just talking about you, that is too narrow of a view. Now, it has something to do with you. If you're white, it has something to do with you. If you're Black, it has something to do with you. If you're brown, but it's not all about any of us. It's all about all of us. And it's very important to keep that perspective in front of us. I've done this work all over the United States and in a few countries outside of the United States of trying to work with people on racial healing. And you know, there's so many times that I run into groups of people where someone in the group just takes everything really personally and really think that it's all about them. And it's just not all about you. It's not just all about me. If I want to sit and say, these many bad things happen to me because I'm Black, now, therefore, blah, 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 that is a very bad analysis in a way to look in terms of looking at the big picture and looking at the whole and looking at the way that we have constructed reality in our country. We need to get ourselves a bit out beyond ourselves so we can kind of stand back and look at the world with some understanding of the systems and how those systems are working and how those systems impinge upon other people. This settler colonialism and slavery are the two things that we have got to engage in some kind of real way, and we cannot hide from, we cannot run from, we cannot cover it up. It is what happened. And we still have lurking around the edges this commitment to genocide. We are willing to kill too quickly. And we have this spirit floating around in our country that makes us so quickly ready to devolve into settling an issue with violence. And I think that that's another part of what has to be done in order for, we have to confront that in order for us to begin to build the kinds of bridges that we need to build to move ourselves on down the road. So tell the truth. What would that look like for you and me if we're willing to tell the truth about ourselves, and then if we're willing to tell the truth about our country, and willing to tell the truth about our church? What would happen? How might the world be different if we had been willing to stand in the face of this history and just say, this is what it is? But the sad thing is that you have got to make a big commitment to just even find out what the history really is, because so many of the ways in which that history has been told was very carefully arranged so that you did not get the truth. You know, we spent so much of our time being told things that just were not even related to the truth. I remember as a little girl watching television where all I saw were Native people who were always trying to harm white people. And I was always rooting for the white people because I thought the Natives were terrible because they wanted to scalp people and do all these bad things. And then I learned that the white people were the ones who started the scalping, and that the white people were the ones who came and with the edict to kill them, to bring smallpox to them and other diseases to make sure that they were wiped out. I mean, those were orders. Those were, there was not some renegade somewhere who just went off on his own to do such dastardly things to people. These were orders. This was a policy. This was the way in which we were choosing to act. But for all those years, I mean, you saw those same kinds of shows on television, I'm sure, as I did. And even today, I don't watch Westerns or anything, but the Westerns were really the biggest culprits of that kind of thinking. And when you present people in those ways, it is impossible for them to actually be seen as equal human beings. But when we get right down to who we are as people of faith, we have the baptismal covenant that has told us to respect the dignity in every person, and also encourages us to be open to God being in all the people that we encounter. And then once we established this country, we had the audacity to say that all men were created equal. Now, of course, we know what that was all about, that there was no intention to make sure that all people had access to everything in an equal way. But sometimes it's very funny to me to think about that, you know, God just plays these funny tricks on us. We say stuff and we set up systems and ways of being that are better than we were ever planning to act. And then we get called to do what we said. So here we are being called to stand up and tell this truth about what we have done as a group of people, what we have done to other people created in God's image. Everybody made in the image of God. Everybody on the planet. Now, I tell you that notion can be problematic because you have to make some decisions about what you really believe. Do you believe that there is one God in the universe who has created everybody and made everybody in God's image and loves everybody equally? Do you really, deep down at the bottom of your heart, when you're sitting in your house by yourself, believe that? Or do you believe that some people are just a little hair's breadth better than other people? So then do you think there's a God who splits God's self up and has some people that are better, some people that are better than, some people that are less than? Or do you believe that there are a bunch of gods that have made a bunch of different kinds of people and that all these people are here having to compete with each other? Those are questions that have to be answered in order to be willing to embrace the truth as it actually exists. So if I tell myself and come to really accept that I, in fact, do believe there's one God who's made everybody and who loves everybody equally, then I know that what happened to Native people and to African people and other groups of people too on this planet was not in keeping with what God would have wanted. And if I'm trying to follow God and trying to be who God wants me to be, then I have to figure out some way to understand that history, to understand its impact upon me, and to make myself come to the place of looking it in the face and saying to God, so what do I do now? So what do I do now? So where do I go now? So what is my response to be? And the response cannot be that I will stick my head in the sand and say it's not true. The response cannot be that I will pass the buck, that I will blame other people, that I will do anything but to really acknowledge that history. That cannot be the response if we're interested in being well. And so there are these questions. You know, I get to the point sometimes when I think, I wish I didn't know some of the stuff that I know, because if I didn't know it, my life might be a little easier. But once you know it, you can't not know it. Once you know it, it's there, you know it, and it's gonna keep on being there. And whether you acknowledge it or live into it or not, it doesn't matter because you do know it. And you know, the truth has a funny, strange way of needling us until we either do something about it or we have to really beat it up and pack it away and decide to never engage it again. So I want to say, I know we're going to have some time in a little bit to break into smaller Zoom rooms, we call them, and have you have a chance to talk to one another some about some of these things that I've just been talking about. But I want to say that this interrogation process that I'm talking about has a whole lot to do with truth telling. And what I see us doing in our church and in our country is being unwilling to ask questions and unwilling to do the interrogating that needs to be done, and really trying to jump quickly to solutions. So we talk about racial reconciliation because we don't want to talk about racial healing, because to talk about racial healing, we got to talk about telling the truth. And telling the truth means we got to go back and dig into this history that we really don't want to think about, or we want to explain, or we want to make into something something different from what it really was. So if you can just imagine that there was this world that was made and filled up with people, and that when the Europeans decided, for whatever reasons, they wanted to go around and see what else was in the world, it is interesting to me to think about what made them have the attitude that everybody they found everywhere else was somehow sub-level to them. You know, that projection of whoever you find that's not like you and doesn't worship like you, you have the right to kill them. That's what the doctrine of discovery is all about. That you could just, I mean, the popes gave the explorers what's called a papal bull, P-A-P-A-L, bull, to go, which is an authority, which is an edict, to go do this exploration. And the people that you find that are heathens or don't believe in God and don't practice God like we do, then those are folks that you can do anything you want to them. You know, what a concept. What a concept that should be the way you would think about people, from some people that you didn't know about yet. And also what a concept to think that because you didn't know about somebody and you found them, that somehow now they just now were discovered. They knew about themselves before you got there. So you're the one that has discovered somebody, and you are the one who now needs to make your peace with, here are these people who don't do what you do, don't maybe eat what you eat, don't talk like you, don't pray like you, but they are human beings. So how did we come to this place that we divided up God's humanity in the ways that we have and decided to treat people the way that we did? Those are to me the basic kinds of questions that we've got to dig into the soil of racism with in order to be able to actually do the kind of excavating work that has to be done so that we could move on down the road. Next week, we'll talk about healing. And healing is about doing that excavating work, digging into the roots and really trying to see what's there, and then trying to see if what's there is what needs to be there. And because we are God's people, because we are people of faith, because we stand as God's family, we can do this work together. We can do this work. We can tell this truth, because we don't tell the truth in terms of trying to create guilt or judging anybody. We tell the truth seeking liberation. What a different perspective to be talking about the truth so that I can be free, so that you, if you're white or Latinx or Asian or Native, can be free, as opposed to tell the truth so I can make you feel bad. I don't know anybody who wants to tell the truth to make somebody else feel bad, except somebody who's in pretty bad shape already. you know, you're feeling bad yourself, so you want to make other people feel bad. I know that there are some people around like that. But when it comes to racial healing, and certainly when it comes to the work that I do and the people that I interact with, we're not trying to tell the truth to make anybody feel bad. We're trying to tell the truth to help set us all free. We're all in this together, and we're all captives of this energy that's been set loose on the planet that denigrates and wants to kill, and this commitment to genocide that we have practiced far too long. Brian Stevenson, who is in your part of the world, more than mine actually, and who I have such great regard for, said that, you know, we are addicted to genocide. We're addicted to violence, I think. We're addicted to, well, he actually said, he didn't say we were addicted to genocide. He said we are genocidal, have a genocidal culture. And I say we're addicted to violence because we have decided violence is the way to problem solve. And I believe that that's a very poor way to problem solve. And also Brian Stevenson said that slavery never ended, it just evolved. So those are truths. Those are pieces of the truth. And that's hard truth. But if you think about the systems that we have put in place and the ways in which we've gone about trying to keep those systems in place, then it becomes easier for you to understand that kind of analysis. So where do you find yourself in this kind of construct of wanting to tell the truth and to hear the truth and to engage the truth and to trust the great words of Jesus Christ, that the truth will set you free? You know, what a great promise. What a great promise that if we tell the truth, we can be free. If we tell the truth, we can be set free. If we tell the truth, we can build a world where everybody can live here in peace in our land. I'm not remembering how much time we're supposed to have for breakout time, but I want to be mindful of that. Sonia, can you tell me how much time?
I think you have 5 more minutes.
Okay, great.
If you want to take
all right.
5 minutes, you can do that.
All right, good. I forgot to ask before we started. So
yeah, if I'm not right, Joe or somebody else chime in if that's not correct.
Okay.
Thanks.
So because of this way of approaching the people that we found here, that the Europeans found here, and then bringing people from the African continent and denigrating them and creating a slave system, because of, pardon me, because of that way of thinking and relating to those people that were othered to the point of being dehumanized, we lost a lot. When you read about the Native culture, you realize that we lost so much in terms of their nurturing, caretaking spirits and the ways in which they attended to the earth and respected the natural order. This same thing was true with people of the African diaspora. The people's way of being was something that could have enhanced the life of the Europeans. So if the Europeans, the Africans, and the Native people could have had a different kind of beginning, we would have a different world. Wonder what that world would have been like if we could have been respectful and learned from each other and built upon one another's ways of being in the world. I'd like to think about that. I like to think that's something that's deserving of some thought. But we lost a lot of that, and we lost a lot of our own humanity as a nation. You cannot practice genocide against people and that kind of brutal way that it was meted out to the Native people and the dehumanization that went along with putting folks into slavery and maintaining slavery and any other kinds of ways that we have denigrated human beings. You cannot do that without your own soul being injured. So there's an injury in our land for the soul of this country has an injury in it that we've got to work on. The healing is not just to get things where, you know, Black and brown people are equal and have whatever white people have. It's deeper than that. And otherwise, we wouldn't still be struggling with it all these years later. So I think that God is calling us to stand up and be different in a new way now. I believe that in 2020, we've been handed an invitation to tell the truth with a greater intensity, to tell the truth with a greater sense of really trying to hear what we need to hear, and then figuring out how we need to stand in the face of it. And to know that we're doing all of that because we want to be free. We want to be free people, and we want everybody around us to be free. And nobody is trying to make anybody feel bad. It is about trying to help people get liberated. And if you do get liberated, you'll feel better, because being liberated is better than not being liberated. You know, no matter what else is wrong, to just have this sense of freedom is a good thing. So I want to encourage you now, as you break into these small groups, there's some questions that you have to, that have been put together for you to respond to, but I want you to really think deeply about, you know, where's the space that you've got that needs to be looked at more deeply and needs to be embraced with compassion and real openness to letting new light shine on it. And maybe at the end of this session tonight, there can be a little bit more liberation in Georgia and Florida and Alabama, because we've been here together and we've had these conversations this evening. So we'll stop here, and then we'll come back after your time together in the breakout rooms. And I guess there'll be some time then for some questions, and I can hear a little bit about what kinds of things got stirred up for you as I have been speaking about our Native sisters and brothers and our African-American brothers and sisters in terms of the settler colonialism and the legacy of slavery.
I've received several questions from some of you directed at Dr. Meeks. And Dr. Meeks, the first question is, why do you think that people are very threatened by the idea of telling the truth about we European Americans have done?
Well, I suppose, you know, I'm not totally sure. I'd have to be talking to individual people to know, but as a generalization, I would say that people feel that their life needs to change in some kind of way, because when they hear about the inequities and the unrest that is around those that keeps coming up around all of that, they know something has got to give. And so I think the uncertainty of what is it going to mean to have life be different. I mean, people have connected their identities, the white people have connected their identity so deeply in the way that the world is constructed, and not able to separate themselves from that world in terms of, I know myself to be who I am as a person, and if everything external to me changes, I'm still the person that I know myself to be. But if you don't have that sense of yourself, if the external world is a big part of your definition of yourself, it's very hard to let go of that. So I think that there's fear that there's going to be, this change is going to be required of me, and I don't know what that change is going to be. So let's not talk about it. Let's try to let things stay the same. Let's try not to rock the boat, unfortunately. And the thing about that is that the boat's going to rock whether you talk about it or not, and you'll have to figure out how to live with that and deal with that. And it would just be a lot easier journey if we could be engaged in the conversations.
Thank you. Second question is, Dr. Meeks, do you honestly believe that America will ever deal with its history of racism in a similar manner that the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission did with apartheid?
Well, you know, first of all, let me just say my friends from South Africa aren't that impressed with what they've done. So, and they had those conversations, but then they reconstructed a lot of, in a lot of ways, the Black South Africans are having a really tough time. So I want to say that because we can romanticize that was somehow the Truth and Reconciliation process was something that was more than maybe it really was. It was important, and I think it is important, and it would be a good thing for us to do as a nation. But it also had great limitations, and there's a lot yet left to be done in South Africa. I don't know that we will do that kind of work in the United States, but what I do know is that the Episcopal Church could do that kind of work. We could decide as a denomination that we want to do real truth telling and work for real healing that could lead us someday to reconciliation. I don't know that we will, but I do believe that we have to act as if we believe it could happen, and we have to keep pushing for it. We have to keep pushing for the healing work, to telling the truth and moving toward healing.
Thank you. Mary Mullins, do you want me to ask the question you posted on chat? Mary?
Sure.
Okay. How can we possibly hope to make peace with the fact that we have engaged in genocide?
Well, you know, there's that great, big, old, wonderful thing called grace. That I think God's grace is sufficient. I think that if we will be people who will turn our faces in the direction of God and be willing to tell the truth and be willing to be open to God's healing, I believe this country can be healed. I believe this country can be better than it is, can be well, really. But we have to be able to imagine ourselves as well people. We have to be willing to do whatever it takes to get well. And so, you know, that's why I just keep coming back to the church, because if there's any group of people that are already on the pathway toward healing, it's people who claim to have faith and people who claim to follow God, because we've already said we're really willing to let go of some stuff in ourselves and turn our faces in the direction of God. So I believe, and I will never quit believing that the healing is possible and that God wants us to be well. And if we will just put our toe in the water, that we'll see the parting of the Red Sea and believe that, and be able to see that there is liberation if we do that. So, you know, I'm just committed to believing in the possibility of that healing, and that that it can happen, and someday that it will happen.
Dr. Meeks, this is the last question. Systemic racism is such an ingrained facet of the American ethos. What can I as a single individual do to stop and confront it?
Well, you know, earlier I heard a comment that somebody made about being glad that tonight I've spoke a lot about systems. And I talked about systems because I think people don't understand systems enough, but there is always personal responsibility and a personal capacity to act. So one of the things that every one of us has to do is make a commitment to be against oppression. You know, to have our way of being in the world is that we stand against oppression wherever we find it, in ourselves, outside of ourselves, in our church, in our country, we stand against it. That is in fact a way to stand against systemic racism is to be personally committed to standing against oppression. And so then everywhere you confront racist expression, you don't tolerate it. You do something, you say something, you are something. Your way of being in the world becomes a stand against systemic racism because you stand against oppression. And it's not like you got to think about it. I mean, if I see or hear or even smell what I think is an oppressive thing, there's something, my little antenna go up and I'm ready to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? That's how you do this. And if enough of us do this, we then destabilize the systems, because systems are orchestrated, put in place and maintained by people. And so it's every person that makes a commitment to stand against oppression, period, in the way you think, the way you act, the way you look at the world. If for every person who does that, the systems are weakened by that stance. So you don't, you become a person who does not tolerate oppression, and you don't tolerate people denigrating anybody. That is how you stand against the system. We always want to think about, we got to go tear down City Hall, and that's just too big of a job. But you can tear down City Hall brick by brick by standing against policies that come out of City Hall, by standing against oppression. So it's not as complicated as we like to think sometimes. It's just hard. And because it's hard, we make it complicated, and then we don't have to do it because it's too complicated. But it's not. I mean, it's pretty simple to just know that if you knock on my door and tell me about an act of oppression against you, I'm going to help you if I can. So I think be a person who's at the very core of your being, you stand for liberation and freedom, and for yourself and for everybody else on the planet, and that you'll do anything you can to help facilitate that for people. That's good if we get there, and we don't have to throw our hands up and be in despair, because we will be doing something. And if enough people do that, this world will be different. It is different because people have done that too.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks. This has been a wonderful presentation, and I want to thank everyone who came out tonight. Just as a reminder, this is just a foretaste of even better things to come. You have to register for the next 2 sessions, so look for the email or go to the diocesan website and make sure that you register so that you'll have a place in next week's program. And it will start again next week at 6:30. And thank you for that, and hope you have a great night.